Welcome to Community Health Matters. I'm your host, Amy Marsalis. Today on our show, we'll hear from experts on reducing your risk of the Zika virus while traveling, staying healthy in the summer heat, and grilling and picnic food safety. All of that coming up next on Community Health Matters. From the News Channel 5 network, this is Community Health Matters, sponsored by the United Health Foundation. Hi everyone. Zika virus has been on the radar for public health departments probably since about 2015. But we just want to refresh your memory on Zika virus with the summer months upon us and people traveling potentially out of the country. And Dr. Morgan McDonald is going to be talking to us about how you can pack for prevention, actually. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us.
Absolutely. So Zika virus, let's go back to sort of the basics. What is it? And how is it spread?
Sure. So Zika virus is a virus that's similar to other infections that we've seen in the past, like dengue or chikungunya, if people have traveled to other regions. And it is spread in a couple of different ways. It's spread by mosquitoes, so affected mosquitoes in an area of local transmission. And it is also spread sexually and potentially through blood products.
And it's been primarily seen in South America, isn't that right? And several years ago we heard about it in Florida, in the Miami area. But right now they're tracking it mostly South America. And what about Tennessee? Have we had any cases?
So you're correct in that really the spread that we've been watching has been through South America, Central America, the Caribbean, certainly Puerto Rico heavily impacted. There have been some areas of local transmission recently in Florida and Texas. The cases that we have seen in Tennessee have been through travel. And so we have not had cases of mosquitoes that have been carrying this virus, but certainly we have seen people as they have returned from travel coming back with the infection.
All right, now we know that you can pack to prevent as far as, making sure that you cover yourself with the proper clothing, insect repellent. Can you go over this list that we have up on the screen?
Sure. So we certainly recommend individuals protecting themselves and their families. And the best way to do that is certainly through insect repellent. And the EPA has registered a list of insect repellents that are effective in preventing these mosquito bites. And we recommend people, yes, packing and using the insect repellent when they are on trips, but also for a couple of weeks after their return to make sure that if they have been infected, that they don't spread it to local mosquitoes. Also, certainly it's important to wear long sleeve shirts, long pants. We think about this particularly in infants, so under 2 months where bug repellent is not approved, but in those younger children and really in all individuals, covering surfaces is going to be the most effective way to prevent mosquito bites. Clothing can be treated with permethrin. Certainly recommend bed nets if you are in an area with mosquitoes or in an area that may not have air conditioning and ventilation systems. And then of course packing condoms to prevent sexual transmission for an individual or their partner.
Now what do you do if you're a pregnant woman traveling to one of these countries?
Yes, so we currently recommend that if a woman is pregnant that she not travel to an area that has ongoing Zika infection.
So don't even get in an area where you would be exposed to
That's the recommendation.
Okay, so what could happen if the woman is exposed and is bitten by a mosquito?
Sure, and two things there, both a woman and her partner that could have potential travel. And so we worry about that travel potential exposure if a woman travels or if her partner travels and comes back and could potentially expose her through sexual transmission. We also worry in that preconception period. So for a woman, if she travels to an area and is not pregnant, we recommend that she postpone pregnancy for 2 months after her return.
So that's how long it could be present in the system?
Yes, and for men it's actually longer. And so if a man travels to an area of Zika infection, we recommend postponing childbearing if possible for 6 months.
Okay. This is great information for people. I don't think people realize the length of time that they could be in trouble.
And that's a message that we're really trying to get out, is to make sure that as much as possible we're planning pregnancies, and in the event that a woman could have been exposed either prenatally or during pregnancy, that she go and request a test.
Okay, what are the symptoms of Zika?
So Zika infection is interesting because it's not, it's frequently asymptomatic, often doesn't have symptoms. If there are symptoms, it's things like cough, fever, rash, and muscle aches. So,
and joint pain
I'm sorry,
as
I
well?
mentioned cough. It's not.
Oh,
it's
sure.
really not cough. It's fever, joint pain, rash, and and
red
involvement.
eyes. Okay, so those would all be, but then some people may be without symptoms. Is that correct?
Yes, frequently without symptoms.
So what would you treat someone with if they do develop this? What would they be treated with?
Yeah, so there's not a specific treatment targeted at Zika virus. This is really symptomatic care. Often these symptoms are very mild, and so treatment with Tylenol if there's a fever present, rest, fluids. We recommend if someone has traveled and there could be a potential of dengue fever, and particularly not to use anti-inflammatories like Advil or Aleve, but really to stick with the Tylenol.
Now, if a baby is born with Zika, we've seen some of the heartbreaking pictures of some of these babies. What can be done to help these children?
Yes, so there are protocols that if a woman is diagnosed prenatally with a Zika possible or confirmed Zika infection, there are protocols for following that woman through pregnancy that include serial ultrasounds and counseling for the woman and her family. We also, here in the state of Tennessee, monitor those pregnancies and outcomes and reach out to the families, connect them to specialists if that is needed. We connect them to early intervention systems within Department of Education. We know that early access to physical therapy, speech therapy do improve outcomes in the long run. And then we connect families to family navigators that help them really think through opportunities for their children as they grow with this.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. McDonald. You gave us a lot of very valuable information about Zika, and something we all need to be aware of for traveling or know people traveling. To stay safe. Thank you so much for your time.
Really appreciate it.
All right, and we'll be back with more after this. Now we're talking about heat-related illnesses, heat exhaustion, even death due to heat, which there are more than 600 deaths, I believe, in the country each year due to heat-related problems. And Dr. Paul is here with the Metro Public Health Department. Thanks for coming in.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
You know, you think this is something, gosh, this is so preventable. How does this happen?
Well, that's a good question because it is preventable. And yet people do die every year from exposure to heat. And so you have to take it seriously. And I think one of the things we especially have to do is think about who's vulnerable and make sure that we're protecting people who are vulnerable to the effects of extreme heat.
And who is it in our population? You know, you always think of the elderly, but beyond the elderly.
Yes, certainly seniors. And people who are socially isolated, oftentimes when there are heat-related deaths, it may be people who are struggling with addiction, or they may be on medications that make them especially susceptible. So those are some of the things that can do it among adults. But then very young children and infants are another group that's vulnerable. And you know, the one thing that you hate to hear about, and we always remind people about, is making sure that infants or children are not left in a hot car.
Oh my goodness, yes. And your pets too.
Pets as well.
Pets too. Okay, so what is the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke?
Well, you know, this is something that is interesting to learn and maybe a little bit hard to remember, but we'll talk through it a little bit because heat exposure to extreme heat can cause milder illness and more severe illness. And so heat exhaustion is on the milder side, even though it can be very serious. People are sweating profusely. They're losing fluids from all that sweat. They may be nauseated a little bit. They may have a kind of a thin pulse, and they might start to feel clammy. That would be heat exhaustion. Of course, fatigue, of course, weakness. For heat stroke, it's a much more serious situation, and so that's where the body temperature goes up above 103 degrees. People lose the ability to sweat. Their skin is red. It's dry. They may have a pounding pulse, and then the symptoms of changing consciousness or even seizure can set in, and that's a medical emergency. It can be deadly.
So would people typically, though, go through those other steps first before they got to the deadly situation? Would they be weak and have clammy skin and then go into the,
Yes.
pass out? That
Yes.
would be the progression.
Most often, yeah.
Okay, so what do you do if you find somebody in that state?
Well, I think if anybody's significantly ill from heat exhaustion, you're going to want to call 911 and get some assistance right away. But the basics of it, both for prevention and for treatment, one is if they can drink, give them something cold to drink. Get them in a cool place. If there's no air conditioning, that's clearly preferred, but at least get somebody into the shade. So it's really hydration with water or a sport drink, and getting people into cooler surroundings and to cool them off. In the more severe cases, you may need to use ice. You want to expose as much skin as you can to the cool air. Those are some of the things to kind of lessen the impact of that overheating.
Okay, and I don't know if we put this up on the screen yet. I didn't look over here about the heat stroke symptoms. I know we had the heat exhaustion symptoms, but if we didn't, we could have those up again. So you talk about the high body temperature.
Right.
What is the temperature? There they are on the screen.
There we go,
Above.
Above 103 degrees, and red, hot, dry skin, rapid, strong pulse, throbbing headache, nausea, dizziness, and possible unconsciousness. So people may get combative, people may have a change in their mental status, and that's all signs of a really severe heat stroke.
Let's talk about people who choose to be outside for recreation or for running, jogging, playing tennis or golf, or really exerting themselves in the heat, maybe on pavement. What are your recommendations as far as limiting your activity when it's hot?
Right, it's important to know that this can be dangerous, and so for people who are really doing something recreational, oftentimes you'll try to do it in the early morning or in the evening when it's cooler. Limit the amount of time, have more realistic expectations of how much exertion you're going to do, and then you're seeking hydration and you're seeking shade, and you want to do everything you can to stay cool. Now, some people have to be out in the heat because of work. And so it's important for the boss, for the employers, to be aware that there can be illness and danger to being in extreme heat for a long period of time. So again, hydration, shade, periods in air conditioning or in a cooler spot.
And wearing clothing that can breathe too, right?
Absolutely.
Covering yourself, but clothing that can breathe.
Yes.
Okay, also what are some other safety tips then for people outside, besides drinking plenty of water? I know we touched on don't leave a child in a hot car, not for any length of time.
Yes, that's always tragic to hear about, and it is amazing how fast the air in a car heats up and how much damage can be done in a short period of time. Pets too, another situation where you can see tragedy in a short period of time.
Sure. Also, I saw on our list, like we talked about earlier, check on if you have elderly neighbors or someone that you know tends to stay home a lot for whatever reason, like you said, whether it's addiction or other problems. Check on your neighbors and be a good neighbor.
For heat-related illness, the basic message of stay hydrated and stay cool is one that most of us really understand.
Yes.
So then we really have to be looking after the vulnerable. And who's vulnerable among us? Well, it is the seniors, it is the very young. Then there might be people who are socially isolated or people who are trying to say they can't afford the air conditioning bill. So
Yes.
you need to look in on your neighbors and make sure that they are able to stay cool when the heat outside gets
Okay.
extreme.
All right, Dr. Paul, thank you.
Thank
This-
you. It's been
this
a
time of
pleasure.
the year, thank you so much. And we'll be back with more after this. There's nothing like packing a picnic this time of year and taking the family, taking friends out with your favorite, summer foods and drinks. And Danny Ripley's here to talk about doing it the safe way, and he's even got a tool with him that we probably all should have. Glad you could come in today
Thank
to
you
talk
for
to
having
us.
us.
So, what is the biggest problem you see with people when they're taking food to kind of a remote location? You mentioned earlier before we started to go on camera about if you're away from refrigeration, that's sort of where the problems can crop up.
Well, there can be problems, certainly with foods that require temperature control. So temperature control is always a topic of interest. And then there's cross-contamination. Cross-contamination can occur when we're transporting foods. If we have raw foods and we have foods that are not going to be cooked, we want to keep those things separate. So there's the
Okay.
cross-contamination element, there's temperature element, temperature control elements involved in food safety.
Okay, so let's start with the food safety tips, preparing them in general, kind of basics.
Okay, well, for an outdoor event, if we think of food safety for outdoors, there's really, the concerns are keeping foods from becoming contaminated, and also in some cases removing contamination from the food. Some of our foods, especially raw foods, may have contamination on them normally, and we have to remove that contamination through cooking. So we want to make sure we get an effective cook-kill step when we're grilling our food out. And again, this applies to raw foods. Now, once the food's cooked, or if we have other foods that are ready to eat, such as breads or sandwiches or things of that nature, we want to keep those foods protected from contamination. We call that cross-contamination, and it can occur with our hands, it can occur with contaminated surfaces. There's a number of ways that cross-contamination can occur. But those are our two big factors when it comes to food protection in an outdoor environment.
I know we've got a list of outdoor grilling tips to put full screen if you want to kind of go through those, Danny.
Sure. Sure. So yes, controlling hand washing is a challenge in outdoor settings. Often we don't have sinks available
Right.
so that we can wash our hands. So an alternative to hand washing in those environments could be using hand sanitizer.
Sure.
Or using barriers. If you're dealing with raw product, perhaps the preparation in an environment, if it's at home, where we can do as much of the raw prep at home as possible, so that limits how much we have to handle that food. The best example would be pattying hamburgers. If we patty the hamburgers and have those pre-made before we go to the picnic site, then we'd have less handling necessary before the cook step.
Okay. All right, and you have one of these thermometers with you. Let's
Yes.
talk about the proper temperatures.
Yes,
different
absolutely.
meat.
So one of a cook's best friend is going to be a food thermometer.
Okay.
And it's important that we reach that final cook-kill step because there could be germs present on certain species of meats and poultry and seafood that need to be removed.
Okay.
So some of the temperatures that we often suggest, the highest end, or excuse me, the lowest end would be something for like a prime rib at 130 degrees, and that's a 2-hour cook time on that. But if we move up to the steaks, beef steaks, if we move up to pork steaks, whole cuts, seafoods, eggs, we're in the 145 mark. And then if we move to the ground products like ground pork, ground beef, we need to go to 155 for at least 15 seconds. And then poultry, any form of poultry, needs to go to 165. And the only way that we can verify that is using a thermometer.
Okay. All right. Now, how long can food stay outdoors without the risk of contamination?
Well, generally speaking, we say that a food can sit out at any temperature for up to 4 hours, provided that food is discarded afterwards. Now, often folks want to take the food and use it at some other point in time, leftovers that is. And if that's the case, the time should really be limited to 2 hours, and then that food be taken back under control, whether it be temperature control or some other process or step.
Okay, all right. What picnic foods are most susceptible to contamination?
Well, most susceptible would be those perishable foods. Any food that could grow germs that could make us sick, they're certainly going to be higher on the list of concern. All foods could become contaminated, from bread, potato chips, etc. But those foods that have protein, high moisture, that can grow bacteria, that can make you sick, those are the ones that we really need to pay special attention to, especially when it comes to temperature control.
All right. Something going back to one of the outdoor grilling tips from earlier about placing grilled foods on a clean plate. You think, well, of course, that makes sense. But when you take the raw hamburger, you cook it, the last thing you want to do is put that cooked hamburger back on the same plate, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We call that cross-contamination. And we want to avoid that by using clean plates, clean utensils when at all possible. Disposable plates help prevent that from occurring as well. But if we touch the food, or the food touches a surface that comes in contact with, let's say, bread or cheese or lettuce, tomato, onion, anything like that, we can get enough contamination to cause illness.
Okay. How should you safely store the foods then? I know we've also got a list, full screen on that.
Yeah, so for transporting foods, it's important to keep the foods protected from raw foods, from cooked foods during transport.
Okay.
It's best to keep the foods at as close to the temperature as possible. The coldest we can keep the food before we leave out, or the hottest we can have the food before we leave. Insulate the food in some type of cooler. Use ice for cold foods to help maintain temperature.
Okay. And the last thing I saw on the list was to store chilled foods in shallow containers.
So when we're chilling foods, when we're cooling foods down, by using shallow containers, it speeds the process up. The main thing is that this temperature that we've been talking about is adhered to, and we keep the foods out of this, what we call the temperature danger zone, the 41 to 135. And that's what's important. And using a thermometer, whether it be in the cooking or even knowing what the temperatures are during transit, is important.
That needs to be a tool in the picnic
It
basket.
absolutely does.
All right, Danny, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Here's to safe picnicking this summer.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your time. We'll be right back. Thank you for watching Community Health Matters. Learn more ways to improve your health at mycommunityhealthmatters.org. And remember, here in Middle Tennessee, our community health matters.